Zeph-47 adjusted the neural interface, connecting his consciousness to the observation pod's sensors. The cold metal of the Confederation research vessel hummed around him as he prepared for what his superiors considered a routine assignment. As a xenobiological analyst for the Galactic Confederation, he had observed dozens of species across the spiral arm. Each had their particular traits, their survival mechanisms, their social structures. Humans were simply the latest addition to his extensive catalog. The briefing had been standard. A recently discovered species on the third planet of a yellow star system, currently engaged in what appeared to be a planetary conflict. The Confederation's policy was clear: observe, document, categorize, and file the appropriate reports. If the species showed promise for eventual contact, they would be monitored until they achieved faster-than-light travel. If not, they would be left to their own devices until they either evolved or destroyed themselves. Zeph-47's species, the Kethvar, had evolved on a world where cooperation meant survival. Their society had eliminated warfare 3,000 years ago through pure logical necessity. When resources became scarce, they developed better technology. When disputes arose, they calculated optimal solutions. Violence was simply inefficient, a waste of energy that could be better spent on advancement. This logical approach had served them well, earning them a position as senior researchers in the Confederation. The human world appeared on his displays as the observation pod drifted silently in the outer system. The planet was beautiful, Zeph-47 had to admit. Blue oceans, white clouds, green and brown continents. It reminded him of several garden worlds in Confederation space. Yet these humans seemed determined to destroy it through constant warfare. Initial scans revealed a species divided into numerous factions, each controlling different portions of their world. Their technology was primitive by Confederation standards, still relying on chemical rockets and nuclear fission. Their weapons were crude, but devastatingly effective against their own kind. What puzzled Zeph-47 was why they continued fighting when cooperation would clearly benefit all parties involved. The current conflict centered around a small island chain in the planet's western hemisphere. One faction was attempting to establish control over strategic resources located there, while the opposing faction defended their territory with remarkable determination. Zeph-47 selected this battle zone for his detailed observations, configuring his sensors to monitor the engagement from multiple angles. The defending forces were vastly outnumbered. According to his calculations, they should have surrendered or retreated within the first few hours of contact. The attacking force possessed superior numbers, better equipment, and tactical advantage. Any logical species would have recognized the futility of resistance and negotiated a peaceful resolution. Yet as Zeph-47 watched through his sensors, something entirely unexpected unfolded. The human defenders had established positions along a series of rocky hills overlooking the main landing beaches. Their weapons were outdated, their armor inadequate, and their numbers insufficient. The attacking force approached with overwhelming superiority, confident in their inevitable victory. Everything proceeded according to standard military doctrine until the first soldiers reached the defensive perimeter. What happened next defied every model of behavior Zeph-47 had developed for predicting species' response to hopeless situations. The humans did not surrender. They did not flee. They did not even attempt to negotiate. Instead, they fought with an intensity that made no logical sense. Individual soldiers continued firing their weapons even when surrounded. Small groups held positions against overwhelming odds, sacrificing themselves to delay the enemy advance by mere minutes. Zeph-47 watched one human soldier whose leg had been severely injured by an explosive device. According to the biometric readings, the human should have been incapacitated by pain and blood loss. Instead, the individual continued operating his weapon, defending his position while his life slowly drained away. When his ammunition was exhausted, the human used his weapon as a club. When that broke, he threw rocks at the approaching enemies. The behavior made no sense. The individual was going to die regardless of his actions. His resistance would not change the outcome of the battle. His sacrifice served no logical purpose. Yet he continued fighting until his vital signs finally ceased, and even then his body remained at his post, weapon in hand. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield. Humans who should have been terrified instead displayed something Zeph-47 had no word for in his language. They seemed to draw strength from their desperation, becoming more dangerous as their situation became more hopeless. When their equipment failed, they improvised. When their positions were overrun, they fell back and established new ones. When they ran out of ammunition, they fought with whatever they could find. The attacking force, despite their numerical and technological advantages, began to slow their advance. Their casualties mounted not because the defenders possessed superior firepower, but because each meter of ground had to be paid for in blood. The humans were extracting a terrible price for territory that would be lost anyway. As the battle continued into its second day, Zeph-47 found himself making detailed recordings of individual human behaviors that challenged every assumption in his research protocols. These creatures were not behaving according to any known evolutionary or social model. They were sacrificing themselves for concepts that seemed to have no material value: honor, duty, loyalty to their companions. The night provided a brief respite in the fighting, and Zeph-47 used this time to analyze what he had observed. The human defenders had lost nearly half their force, but they had inflicted far greater casualties than their numbers and equipment should have allowed. More importantly, they showed no signs of breaking. If anything, their resistance seemed to intensify as their situation became more desperate. The xenobiological analyst began to wonder if he was missing some crucial element in human psychology. Perhaps their apparent irrationality was actually a sophisticated survival mechanism he did not yet understand. Or perhaps these humans represented something entirely new in his experience, a species whose behavior could not be predicted by conventional models. As dawn approached over the battlefield, Zeph-47 prepared to observe the final phase of what should have been a straightforward military engagement. He had no idea that what he was about to witness would fundamentally alter his understanding of what it meant to be a sentient being in an often hostile universe. The dawn assault began with a coordinated artillery barrage that should have ended all resistance. Zeph-47 watched the explosions tear through the human defensive positions, his sensors recording the devastating impact of high-explosive shells. The rocky hills where the defenders had dug in disappeared beneath clouds of smoke and flying debris. When the bombardment finally ceased, the attacking force advanced expecting to find only scattered survivors ready to surrender. Instead, they found humans emerging from underground bunkers, from behind shattered rocks, from positions that should have been completely destroyed. The defenders had somehow survived the barrage and immediately returned to their weapons. Zeph-47 ran the calculations multiple times, unable to understand how so many had survived such intensive bombardment. The answer came as he observed more closely. The humans had spent the entire night digging deeper, reinforcing their positions, preparing for exactly this kind of assault. But it was not just their preparation that amazed him. It was their response to the attack itself. Where his own species would have been paralyzed by the overwhelming destructive force, these humans seemed energized by it. They moved with purpose and coordination, despite the chaos around them. They communicated through the noise and smoke, directing fire and calling out warnings to their companions, even as explosions continued to rock their positions. Zeph-47 focused his sensors on one particular group of humans defending a critical position overlooking the main approach to the island's central command facility. The unit consisted of 12 individuals, led by a human the others called Sergeant Martinez. According to the biometric readings, Martinez had been wounded in the morning bombardment, but she continued to direct her unit's defense as if the injury was irrelevant. The attacking force concentrated their assault on this position, recognizing its strategic importance. They sent wave after wave of soldiers up the steep approach, supported by armored vehicles and aircraft. The logical response would have been for the defenders to abandon the position and fall back to secondary defensive lines. Instead, Martinez and her unit held their ground. Zef-47 watched Martinez coordinate her small force's resistance with precision that rivaled military computers. She seemed to know instinctively where the next attack would come from, positioning her soldiers to maximum advantage despite their limited numbers. When one of her people was wounded, she personally carried him to cover before returning to her weapon. When their ammunition began running low, she distributed it among her unit to ensure optimal use. What struck Zef-47 most powerfully was not Martinez's tactical skill, but the way her soldiers responded to her leadership. They trusted her completely, following orders that often required them to expose themselves to extreme danger. When she told them to hold their fire until the enemy was almost upon them, they waited with steady nerves until her command to open fire. When she ordered someone to make a dangerous run to retrieve ammunition from a fallen comrade, they did so without hesitation. The connection between these humans was unlike anything in Zef-47's experience. His own species worked together efficiently, but their cooperation was based on logical necessity and calculated benefit. These humans seemed connected by something deeper, something that made them willing to die for each other without any expectation of return. During one particularly intense assault, a young human named Private Chen was separated from the main group when an explosion collapsed part of their defensive position. He found himself alone, surrounded by advancing enemy soldiers with no apparent means of escape. According to every behavioral model Zef-47 knew, Chen should have surrendered immediately to preserve his life. Instead, the young human continued fighting. Chen used the rubble from the collapsed position to create improvised cover, firing his weapon with careful precision to make his limited ammunition last as long as possible. When enemy soldiers approached his position, he threw improvised explosives created from damaged equipment. He fought alone against overwhelming odds for nearly an hour, not because he had any chance of survival, but because his resistance drew enemy attention away from his companions. Zef-47 observed Martinez's reaction when she realized Chen's situation. The sergeant's vital signs showed extreme emotional distress, but she did not abandon tactical discipline. Instead, she organized her remaining soldiers for a rescue attempt that had almost no chance of success. She was willing to risk her entire unit to save one individual, even though the logical choice would have been to abandon him and preserve the majority. The rescue attempt failed. Chen's position was overrun before Martinez could reach him. Zef-47 expected the loss to break the unit's morale, to finally convince them that continued resistance was futile. Instead, the opposite occurred. The death of their comrade seemed to strengthen their resolve. They fought with increased intensity, as if Chen's sacrifice had somehow made their own lives more valuable rather than less. As the battle continued through the day, Zef-47 witnessed scenes that challenged everything he thought he knew about survival behavior. Humans sharing their last water with wounded companions. Soldiers using their own bodies to shield others from explosions. Medics running through enemy fire to treat casualties, armed with nothing but medical supplies and determination. The most remarkable incident occurred when the attacking force managed to breach the main defensive line. A human engineer named Thompson found himself responsible for destroying a critical bridge that would prevent enemy vehicles from advancing to the command center. The explosive charges had been damaged by artillery fire, requiring someone to detonate them manually. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. Thompson volunteered immediately. He did not hesitate, did not ask for alternatives, did not even seem to consider the cost to himself. He simply acknowledged the necessity and prepared to sacrifice his life for the mission. As he ran toward the bridge under intense enemy fire, his companions provided covering fire, knowing they were helping him reach his own death. Zeph-47 watched Thompson reach the bridge and activate the charges. The explosion destroyed the structure and eliminated the immediate threat, but it also ended Thompson's life. The engineer had calculated the timing perfectly, ensuring maximum damage to the enemy advance while accepting his own death as a necessary component of the equation. The aftermath of Thompson's sacrifice revealed another aspect of human behavior that Zeph-47 found incomprehensible. The defending force did not celebrate their tactical victory. Instead, they observed a moment of silence for their fallen comrade, even as enemy fire continued around them. They grieved for Thompson while simultaneously drawing strength from his example. By evening, the human defensive force had been reduced to fewer than 30 individuals, but they had stopped the enemy advance completely. The attacking force, despite overwhelming numerical superiority, had been unable to secure their objectives. Their casualties were mounting, their morale was deteriorating, and their commanders were beginning to question the wisdom of continuing the assault. Zeph-47 realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in his extensive research. A numerically inferior force with primitive equipment was defeating a superior enemy through sheer determination and tactical excellence. But more than that, they were demonstrating qualities that existed outside normal evolutionary parameters. These humans fought not just for survival, but for concepts that had no material existence: honor, loyalty, sacrifice for others. They drew strength from adversity rather than being weakened by it. They became more dangerous when cornered, more determined when faced with impossible odds. They transformed individual weakness into collective strength through bonds that transcended logical calculation. As darkness fell over the battlefield, Zeph-47 began to understand that his assignment had become something far more significant than routine xenobiological observation. He was witnessing the emergence of a species that might challenge everything the Confederation thought it knew about intelligence, civilization, and the nature of sentient life itself. The battle was not over, but already Zeph-47 knew that his report would be unlike any he had ever written. These humans were not just another species to be cataloged and filed away. They were something new, something unexpected, something that might change the galaxy's understanding of what was possible when intelligence was combined with an indomitable will to survive and protect others. The final day of battle began before dawn with what should have been the decisive assault. The attacking force had received reinforcements during the night, bringing their numbers to nearly 10 times that of the remaining defenders. They possessed air superiority, armor advantages, and artillery support. Every calculation indicated that the human resistance would collapse within hours. Zeph-47 had spent the night analyzing the data from the previous 2 days, trying to understand the behavioral patterns he had observed. His analytical protocols suggested updating his species classification for humans, but he lacked the proper categories. How do you classify a species that seemed to violate fundamental assumptions about survival behavior? How do you document creatures that became stronger when they should become weaker? The final assault revealed the answer in ways that left Zeph-47 permanently changed. As enemy forces advanced on the last defensive positions, the remaining human defenders did something that defied every model of military behavior. Instead of attempting to preserve their lives through defensive positioning, they launched a counterattack. 27 humans, many wounded with limited ammunition and no hope of victory, charged directly into an enemy force of nearly 300. Zeph-47 watched Sergeant Martinez lead the charge, her voice carrying across the battlefield as she shouted encouragement to her remaining soldiers. The humans moved with perfect coordination despite having no time to plan their assault. They seemed to understand each other's intentions instinctively, covering each other's movements and concentrating their fire where it would have maximum impact. The attacking force, caught completely off guard by this impossible assault, faltered. Soldiers who had been advancing confidently suddenly found themselves under intense fire from humans who should have been cowering in defensive positions. The psychological impact was devastating. How do you fight an enemy who attacks when they should surrender, who becomes more dangerous as they become more desperate? Private Rodriguez, one of the youngest defenders, found himself separated from the main assault when enemy fire forced him to take cover behind a destroyed vehicle. Instead of waiting for support or attempting to retreat, he began systematically eliminating enemy positions with precision that amazed Zeph-47. The young human had transformed himself into a one-person army, moving through the battlefield with deadly efficiency. Zeph-47 monitored Rodriguez's vital signs as he fought. The human's heart rate was elevated, but not with panic. Instead, the biometric readings suggested a state of focused calm, as if the immediate threat of death had somehow clarified his thinking rather than clouding it. Rodriguez moved with economy of motion, making every shot count, using the terrain to his advantage with tactical awareness that rivaled veteran soldiers with decades of experience. When Rodriguez finally ran out of ammunition, he did not surrender. Instead, he picked up weapons from fallen enemies and continued fighting. When those weapons were exhausted, he used improvised weapons created from battlefield debris. When his improvised weapons broke, he fought with his hands. He continued fighting until overwhelming numbers finally brought him down, but not before eliminating more than a dozen enemy soldiers. Sergeant Martinez's assault group had similar success despite their impossible odds. They carved through enemy positions with determination that seemed to increase rather than diminish as their numbers decreased. When Martinez herself was mortally wounded, she continued directing her soldiers' movements from where she lay, coordinating their actions until her voice could no longer be heard. The last three defenders were Corporal Williams, Private Jackson, and Private Kim. They had established a final position in the ruins of what had been the command center, surrounded by the bodies of their fallen comrades and facing an enemy force that still numbered in the hundreds. According to every military doctrine Zeph-47 had studied, this was the moment when any rational force would surrender to preserve the lives of the survivors. Instead, the three humans made their last stand with dignity and ferocity that left their enemies shaken. They fought not just for their own lives, but for the memory of their fallen comrades, for the principles they believed in, and for something Zeph-47 finally began to understand: the idea that some things were worth dying for. Williams held the left approach, his weapon firing with mechanical precision until his ammunition was exhausted. Jackson covered the right approach, throwing improvised explosives when his bullets ran out. Kim maintained their center position, providing covering fire for his companions and calling out enemy movements with steady calm, despite the overwhelming odds. When the end finally came, it came with honor. Williams died at his post, weapon in hand, having never retreated a single step. Jackson fell while charging an enemy position that threatened to overrun Kim's position, sacrificing himself to buy his companion a few more minutes. Kim fought alone for the final minutes, surrounded by the bodies of his friends, until enemy fire finally silenced his weapon forever. But something extraordinary happened in those final moments. The attacking force, despite their overwhelming victory, did not celebrate. They approached the human positions with something Zeph-47 recognized as respect, even reverence. These enemies had been transformed by what they had witnessed. They had defeated the human defenders, but they had also been defeated by them in ways that went beyond simple military calculation. Zeph-47 observed the aftermath with sensors that recorded everything, but could not capture the true meaning of what had occurred. The attacking force secured their objectives, but their victory felt hollow. They had won the battle while losing something essential about themselves. They had seen what humans were capable of, and that knowledge changed them. The xenobiological analyst found himself equally transformed by what he had witnessed. His original assignment had been simple: observe, document, categorize, and file a report. But how do you categorize a species that fights hardest when defeat is certain? How do you document creatures who find strength in sacrifice? How do you file a report about beings who can transform their enemies through the example of their deaths? Zeph-47 began composing his report to Confederation headquarters, but found himself unable to use standard classification protocols. The humans had displayed technological capability, tactical awareness, and combat effectiveness. But those measurable factors failed to capture what made them truly remarkable. They possessed something that could not be quantified or categorized: an indomitable spirit that transformed weakness into strength, defeat into victory, death into inspiration. As his observation pod prepared to depart the system, Zeph-47 realized that his perspective on intelligence, civilization, and the nature of sentient life had been fundamentally altered. The Confederation's approach to evaluating species was based on logical analysis, technological advancement, and cooperative efficiency. But these humans had demonstrated that logic was not the only path to greatness. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simply refusing to accept defeat. The final entry in Zeph-47's report recommended immediate priority status for continued human observation, not because they posed a threat to the Confederation, but because they represented something the galaxy had never seen before: a species that could inspire their enemies, transform defeat into moral victory, and demonstrate that the greatest strength sometimes came from the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Months later, as Zeph-47 submitted his completed analysis to Confederation leadership, he included a personal note that violated every protocol for xenobiological reporting. He recommended that when the Confederation eventually made contact with humanity, they should approach not as superior beings evaluating primitives, but as students hoping to learn from teachers. The humans had shown him that survival was not the highest goal of intelligent life. Sometimes, how you lived and died mattered more than whether you lived or died. Sometimes, the greatest victory came from refusing to surrender your principles even when surrender would save your life. Sometimes, the most advanced beings in the galaxy were not those with the most sophisticated technology, but those with the most unbreakable spirit. Zeph-47 never forgot what he had witnessed on that small human world. The memory of Sergeant Martinez leading her final charge, of Thompson sacrificing himself for his mission, of Rodriguez fighting alone against impossible odds, remained with him for the rest of his life. They had shown him that there were forms of strength that could not be measured by any instrument, and forms of victory that could not be defeated by any weapon. The humans had changed him completely, just as the title of his report indicated. But perhaps more importantly, through his observations and recommendations, they had begun to change the Confederation's understanding of what it truly meant to be alive in a vast and often hostile universe.